Okay, for the last half hour, before we are attacked by not dead yet, we have been speaking about breaking barriers. And we're speaking about solutions for children, couples, mentally ill, and all with the focus on assistance by doctors. I don't know whether this is a barrier, but Wendell Stephenson, who is a president of our host, Final Exit Network, he will speak to us about the non-medical ways of aid in dying. Wendell, up to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be in front of you. I've been in front of you, some of you, or maybe all of you, welcoming you, and now I get the pleasure of making a little address to you. I'm a philosopher by training, and it's possible this little talk will come across as philosophical talk, but it doesn't seem so to me. Having written philosophical papers, this doesn't seem like a philosophical paper, but I apologize if it does come across like that. I'll basically read it, but I'll probably pause to make some asides. So I understand non-medical methods in support to be any methods in support for ending one's life that are not part of a legally sanctioned medical practice or regimen. So in the United States, for example, the helium method and the provision of a compassionate presence at the time of its use is a non-medical method and support process. Whoops. So is the self-administration of an overdose of barbiturates, even when legally prescribed by a doctor, for the doctor has not overseen the process to ensure that it's successful. So that's what a non-medical method is, in my understanding. To my knowledge, the organized and systematic presentation of non-medical methods in support in the United States begins with the Caring Friends arm of the Hemlock Society in about 1998. If this is right, I find it remarkable that no one heretofore has sought to organize a publicized system of support for sick and dying people outside of the medical establishment. That seems fairly recent. There may have been clandestine organizations, I don't know, and maybe nobody knows if they truly were clandestine. Such support was, and clearly still is, practically and morally necessary, and it may always be. This is as true in states or societies with the most liberal and advanced policies on legal euthanasia and assisted suicide, Holland, for example, as it is in the less liberal and advanced societies like the United States, for example. In the United States, people cite Oregon and its law that allows terminally ill people to ask for and receive a prescription which they can then take to end their lives. This law leaves many kinds of suffering people in the lurch, for many such people do not qualify as terminally ill under the law. For example, many people suffering from various kinds of neurological disorders, Parkinson's, MS, dementia, and so on. If for no other reason then, and there are other reasons, an Oregon-style law is not the answer that many people are looking for as they suffer with lethal, debilitating, and painful conditions of various kinds. A better law would allow for voluntary euthanasia and would apply to people who are not classified as terminally ill. Most of the members we work with are not classified as terminally ill. The non-medical model developed by Caring Friends initially and carried on now by Final Exit Network is part of the answer that these people are looking for. But it's only part of the answer. And the reason why is because many people do not have the physical ability to avail themselves of one or the other of the two methods that Final Exit Network supports. So for example, if one has little or no control over one's arms or one's legs or hands, sorry, it's not so important to have your legs. Actually, it is, come to think of it. One cannot use the helium method on one's own, and Final Exit Network would run afoul of almost universal laws against assisted suicide if it were to physically assist a person to use the method. Many people cannot swallow, hence many people who would wish to end their lives with an overdose of barbiturates, assuming they could somehow get them in sufficient quantities, cannot end their lives through an overdose, the other method that Final Exit Network supports. There's no viable alternative here but an appropriately designed medical model that allows a physically incapacitated but mentally competent person to receive assistance from a physician or appropriately trained medical worker. Of course, there's the alternative that a person diagnosed with MS or ALS or dementia end his or her life long before he or she becomes severely ill and incapacitated. But this deprives such people of months or possibly even years of life that they would judge to be of high enough quality to continue living. I had a personal conversation with the vice president of Exit Swiss, whose name is slipping me right now. But I had a long conversation with him today, and I discussed these particular cases with him, asking him why in Switzerland there's no push for a euthanasia law. They have a quite liberal assisted suicide law. And he said, well, you know, many of our members tell us that we should be pushing for an for an euthanasia law, precisely because of cases like dementia and some of these others that I just mentioned. So maybe it will happen in Switzerland eventually also. Final Exit Network informs its members accepted into our guide program about what we call the window of opportunity. This refers to one's currently having the physical abilities required and one's being mentally competent. The hardest cases for me that we have are with people who seem to all outward appearances to be in pretty good health and who are still able to enjoy life, but have decided that their window of opportunity is closing, and so they must act. The director of our medical evaluation committee, Tom Tuxell's in the room, and one of the cases we had together was of a really quite youngish woman. I don't think she was much more than 55 or 60, who kind of bounded into the room when we arrived and greeted us, asked us if we'd like some tea, and had a pleasant conversation with us. And I just thought, this woman wants to die. She's ready to die. And it turns out that she was diagnosed with a very serious disorder, which would eventually kill her, but not for quite a while. But she didn't know when, and she didn't know when she would lose her window of opportunity. So she had to act, or she felt she had to act. Another reason why the non-medical model is only part of the answer is that it is possible for one of the do-it-yourself methods to fail. In the case of the two methods of Final Exit Network, this is rare, and in fact, we've never had a case of failure. However, failure is still a possibility. Since assisted suicide is illegal almost everywhere in the United States, remedying any failure would be difficult to impossible without placing family or volunteers in serious legal jeopardy. This is also a problem with the Oregon-style law because no one is supposed to assist the person who receives the prescription. That person is supposed to go home. People might be present, they can be present, but no one is supposed to assist that person. So if something goes wrong, what's to be done? So these are problems, these are drawbacks to the method, and it seems clear to me that what is needed and what is in fact in place in places like Holland is a combination of the availability of trained volunteers to support people who wish to use a non-medical model and the legal availability of voluntary euthanasia and assisted suicide. I think that's the ideal. Final Exit Network's mission does not focus on changing the laws. Organizations in the United States that do focus on changing the laws seem to be advocating only for Oregon-style laws. I gather this is because they think it's the only law that's possible in the political climate in which we exist. But to me, it is not what's needed, and I often wonder why, even in the United States, we can't work to get much better laws passed. I was just at a session with Madame Yvonne from Quebec, and I was inspired, I must say, by what Quebec has accomplished. If you don't know what they've managed to accomplish recently, I think you should inform yourself about it. It's probably the most inspiring session I've been to because through years of work, very hard work, very dedicated work, they managed to pass a law that is much better than an Oregon-style law, and that has maybe one of the best laws that you could have in this area. How is the non-medical model working as organized and supported by Final Exit Network? First, I want to address the question who Final Exit Network supports. And I've got an addendum to this talk that lays out the categories that we specify that people have to meet. They can meet one of the categories and be accepted. We've got something like 6 categories. And the explanations of those categories are laid out in the addendum to the piece. This talk would be way too long if I tried to go through each of them, and it would also be more boring than it is. So briefly, Final Exit Network supports terminal as well as non-terminal medical diagnoses, and I put those in quotes because, as is agreed by almost everybody, it's difficult to define terminal. Most non-terminal cases will consist of diagnoses of medical conditions that reduce life expectancy and are physically or mentally debilitating or cause intolerable pain. Examples of these include all forms of malignancy, multiple sclerosis, ALS, and late-stage cardiac or pulmonary disease, and certain cases of dementia. We support certain non-terminal cases where life expectancy is not necessarily reduced, but where chronic, severe, and poorly controlled pain is the main factor. We also support members who suffer from a constellation of medical conditions and physical limitations, which collectively cause an unacceptable quality of life or make an independent, meaningful life possible. And finally, we do support certain cases of mental illness. Our category in this area is quite strict, however, and it's so strict that we have not had one case during the existence, well, at least since I've been president and since I've been part of the board of Final Exit Network, which goes back 4 years. I cannot really speak to whether we had supported anybody who was simply mentally ill when we first started back in 2004. But we will support mentally ill folks under certain conditions. And we may rethink that particular category based on what people may have learned from the preceding session, which I was unfortunately unable to make. So that's the categories of folks that we will support in very broad outlines. We have a medical evaluation committee. It consists of 3 doctors and a 4th as a backup and a 5th as a 5th pair of eyes, right? Dick McDonald, who has probably the most experience of anybody maybe in the whole world in dealing with non-medical methods. It makes the initial determination based on the member's submission of pertinent medical records as to whether a member fits into one of our categories. The final determination as to whether they fit is made by the senior guide on the case. We assign 2 guides to each case, an associate guide and a senior guide. The senior guide has a lot more experience than the associate guide in working with our members and working with methods that we support. And that senior guide is charged with making the final determination after the medical evaluation committee has confirmed that indeed that person suffers from an appropriate problem that fits into our categories. We've been keeping pretty good records going back to January 1 of 2013 to the present. We haven't kept very good records before then, unfortunately. So our records are limited. I was extremely impressed by the records that Exit Swiss has, and I wish we were similar to them, but so far we're not as good. They show that we've had 136 applications during that period that were received by the Medical Evaluation Committee. 125 or 92% of those were granted provisional acceptance. They just grant provisional acceptance, and as I've already said, the senior guide makes the final determination. Of the 11 not approved, 6 were turned down simply because people did not meet the criteria for acceptance, and the other 5 failed to submit additional medical documentation requested by the Medical Evaluation Committee. Most people are quite willing to submit the medical documentation, but we do occasionally run into somebody who just doesn't want to be bothered by it. 81 resided in the western half of the United States, so 60% of them resided in the western half. Not surprising, Arizona is the retirement capital of America, and California is the best place to live in America of any age. The members of my board, Faye Gersh and Howard Fennessy, who are in the room, I think, absolutely agree because they live in California, where I also live. Notice that California accounted for 34% of all applicants. 55 or 40% reside in the eastern half of the United States. From July 1st, we have a breakdown in terms of gender and age and category of diagnosis, and we carried forward, we will have these breakdowns. We're beginning to gather this data. The gender distribution is 70% female, and the age ranges from 40 to 95 with a mean age of 72. I was intrigued to see that our figures correspond fairly nicely to the figures that Exit Swiss gave. Roughly the same percentage of female versus male, and I believe the Dutch figures were similar, comparable. The explanation that Bernard is his name just came to me, right? The explanation Bernard suggested is women live longer, and there are more women, and they therefore wind up overly represented. Also, men tend to, in their lives, by more violent means than women do. The category of diagnoses, cancer, 28%, cardiopulmonary, 3% neurodegenerative dementia, 24%, musculoskeletal, chronic pain, 25%, and you see the average ages there. Constellation of physical disabilities, 20%. During this 14-month period, 23 of the 82 members exited in the comfort and presence of Final Exit Network exit guides. 10 of these members were enrolled in hospice, and 10 had family members or friends in attendance. So what you will notice by that is, again, consistent very much with the Exit Swiss figures. Very few of the people who actually apply carried through and use the method under our supervision. We don't know what happens to the folks that are accepted and receive the training and then don't carry through. We don't know what happens to them. We would like to know, but it's very difficult to find out for a variety of reasons. Caring Friends kept pretty good records from 1998 to 2004 when Final Exit Network took over its work. And Dick McDonald provided me with the records that they kept, and I was intrigued to see that they're fairly similar to keeping reasonably good data of a guide. So far more people are accepted into our guide program than actually exit with guides, and we don't have much information about these folks. What we do know is that all members accepted into our guide program are extremely grateful, and they find tremendous comfort in knowing that we will be there for them if and when they want us to be. And as one of our case coordinators and senior exit guides likes to stress, and she's standing in the back of the room, Fran Schindler, she believes that this is perhaps one of our main, if not our main, benefits that we provide to people, peace of mind, comfort that there is somebody there who will help them if they are suffering unbearably. So I began by talking about the inadequacies of the non-medical models. Despite their inadequacies, they are currently necessary almost everywhere, and especially in backward places like the United States. As I said above, they may always be necessary, for perhaps it is not possible or desirable to have a legal regime that tries to cover every possible circumstance in which a rational, mentally competent person might find it best to end her life. Therefore, there may always be a need for organizations such as Final Exit Network. Thank you.
Thank you, Waldo, for this presentation of final exit guides. We go to the questions. First one from Petra.
Thank you for your presentation. Could you tell me, where do you get your helium and your medication from?
Yes, helium is very easy. We don't provide the tanks. We don't provide any of the equipment to our folks. They have to get it for themselves, but in the United States, it's extremely easy to get helium tanks. You can get them from a typical shop that sells balloons, because the helium tank is necessary to blow up your balloons. Well, it's not necessary, you can blow them up yourself, right? But try blowing up 500 balloons on your own. There's lots of shops in almost every major city in the United States. You can also order them online through Amazon.com, and no doubt lots of other sources. The tubing that's necessary, typical, most hardware stores carry it. Derek Humphrey, as you may know, has an addendum to his book Final Exit, where he tells folks exactly what they need, the dimensions, where to get them, and our guides also tell members where to get these things. So that is very easy, and that's one reason why the helium method is such a good method, because everything that you need is legal and very easily to obtain. As for the barbiturates, they're on their own on that, and it's illegal to sell them. You have to get them through a prescription. You can't buy them without a prescription. That's a real problem. Nevertheless, some of our members manage to obtain the dosage that they need. And maybe sometimes because they have a helpful doctor, a friendly doctor who's willing to give them to them. Maybe they have a supplier from somewhere, and so they get them. I was intrigued. I was talking to somebody from Holland, I believe it was, who said that they're able to tell people who want to end their lives using the overdose of barbiturates. They're able to tell them how they can get them. And we have been advised by our lawyer that this is not something that we should do in the United States, that we would put ourselves in jeopardy of assisting in a suicide. Not to mention that the feds do not like people shipping illegal drugs into the country, in case you didn't know.
Okay. May I just add to this question? I've heard years ago, when the helium method started, that there was rumors that the supplier of helium tanks would mix a little oxygen in the helium, because that does not affect blowing the balloons, but it does affect the effect on the lethal side. Have you had any incident of that?
Yeah, I can't help but think of Mark Twain in this connection. The rumors of my death are greatly exaggerated. Rumors with respect to helium have been greatly exaggerated over the years. We've gone through a series of them over the years that we've existed, and all of them have been false, including one that was current about a year ago, which was we're going to run out of helium. It's kind of similar, and I'm sure I'm going to tread on toes here. A famous American scientist predicted that we were going to run out of oil in 1970 by 1985 or something like that, right? The same scientist, I think, predicted that the population of the Earth would be 40 billion or something by now. Completely false. We have more oil now than we had in 1970, and we have more possibility of getting more oil. Same thing with helium. They discovered this huge supply of helium in places they didn't know it existed.
Okay. Next. Yeah.
Hi, I'm concerned about the fact that a couple of speakers have said that men seek the resources of final exit networks less because they are comfortable with a violent death. I find that very unacceptable, and I'm wondering what our organisations can do to change that situation.
Well, I believe in giving as much information to people as possible, and I think men are rational, more or less, just like women are. And if they knew that there was a safe, painless, quick method that they could avail themselves of relatively easily, they would use that rather than a gun. That's my belief, that's my hope, that information, education would be sufficient. One of the problems that we face, that lots of folks face, is getting our message out there, you know, letting people know, informing them. It's a constant battle. That's my belief. If more people knew about us, less men would kill themselves in a violent way.
A question. Obviously your members, only members would receive a visit from a guide. You have to be a member of Final Exit.
You have to be a member in order to receive our services.
So my main question is there any, I mean, people have joined up and become a member, so obviously they are believing in the organisation. Are there any confidentiality forms that are filled in? Because if I am a guide visiting someone, I'm making myself vulnerable. So what does the member who is being visited, does the member who is being visited have to sign any confidentiality thing to protect the guide so that then they can help somebody else?
No, but now that you mention it, maybe it's a good idea.
Okay, you learn a lot on this conference.
Yes.
Okay, any more questions? In the back. Can you speak out loud or shall I come bring you the microphone?
I'm just wondering what the availability of guides are if you're seeking additional volunteers.
Are you wondering about additional volunteers to become a guide? Yeah. I was hoping you would say additional volunteers to raise money. Or additional volunteers to become president of Final Exit Network. But instead, you asked about what we have plenty of right now. Right? Right now, we have plenty of associate guides. Those are the guides who've been recently trained and maybe have had no cases, only 1 or 2 cases. What we lack is senior guides. And our rule of thumb is a senior guide has to have had 5 cases and have gone through at least 2 trainings in order to qualify. And we lack that. We lack that. It may be interesting to know why we lack that. I think we lack that for a couple of reasons. One is, I already told you that the senior guide makes the final determination as to whether the person will be accepted. Well, it's a pretty burdensome responsibility because, as I'm sure you all know, Final Exit Network has been the subject of some legal pursuits that have put a lot of people in jeopardy and that have cost us a lot of money. And as a senior guide, that's one of the considerations you have to be aware of. If we accept this case, could it put us somehow in legal jeopardy? So that's one reason why some people don't want to become senior guides. The other reason is that you're responsible for overseeing the process. And I already said that there, in the do-it-yourself methods, there are ways it can go wrong. Now, we're not supposed to intervene, but we are supposed to try to make sure that all the steps leading up to it are perfectly understood by the person who's going to end his life, and that the person is able to exercise the needed, able to do the needed actions. And it's a judgment call, right? And there's heavy responsibility there. So a lot of people who are associate guides, they feel comfortable with that because they're with somebody who is ultimately responsible. Once you have the ultimate responsibility, then your attitude can change. So there's a drop-off between people who are associate guides who want to become senior guides.
Okay. A question here.
Could you say something about the shelf life of a helium tank and about refilling them?
All I can tell you is, well, those tanks are not refillable. The tanks you buy that fill balloons are not refillable. They're not built that way. So if I went to a member's house and they said, I just refilled my tank, I would say, well, you're going to have to buy a couple of new ones. Shelf life, we recommend that people do not have their tanks more than 2 years. But that is not based on science. That's just based on a prudential guess. It may be that a tank would last for 10 years without leaking. It may be that it would last less than a year. That's why we have 2 tanks, right? So we just have a policy don't have them in your shelf for more than 2 years.
Okay. No, I'm sorry. We stopped because the time is there. We have to stop and prepare ourselves for the gala dinner. Thank you, Wendell, for your presentation.